I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this session on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples. That includes the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh Nations, and the Métis Chartered Community of the Lower Mainland region. And all of you around the province are on your territories, on the territories in which you find yourselves. And I hope that you spend some time today and over the weekend thinking about where you are and learning more about the people and the history of where you are. Next slide. So it really gives me great pleasure, and I think we're incredibly privileged in British Columbia to be able to have Dr. Stenvinkel speak with us. Peter serves as a professor and senior lecturer at the Department of Renal Medicine in Karolinska at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. He's published over 600 original publications and reviews, many book chapters, and is particularly interested in inflammation, wasting, and metabolism in people living with chronic kidney diseases. His H index is 90 and 113, depending on whether you look at PubMed or Google Scholar, which for those of you who don't know, anything over 40 is outstanding. So 90 to 100 is amazing. That means that his papers are widely read. He's given numerous lectures at international meetings and congresses in about 30 different countries. He received the prize for the best Swedish thesis in diabetology in 1994 and has received multiple grants and is a Carolina Prize awardee in 2005 and a Vicenza Prize awardee in 2009. He has numerous medals and has been speaking and is a member of the Council of the ISN in 2007 and the ERA-EDTA in the same year. He's an associate editor of the NDT and editor-in-chief of NDTE in 2010 to 13, and has been an honorary member of a number of different non-Swedish and non-international societies, and was an International National Kidney Foundation awardee in 2012. So, and I've had the pleasure of hearing Peter give this talk and its evolution, no pun intended, over the years, and I'm really excited that he has agreed to share with us on his Friday afternoon and our Friday morning this talk, Planetary Health and Burden of Lifestyle Diseases, and how we can learn so much from nature. So Peter, over to you, and we're looking very much forward to this.
Yes, thank you so much, Adira. I will start to share my screen, and I hope now that you will.
We can see it, yeah.
See it, and so I will discuss a little bit about, or not a little bit, a lot about planetary health and a little bit what we can learn from nature. And of course, my talk is much based on these global goals from the United Nations for Sustainable Development that we now all need to consider. And while we are working as doctors a lot with good health and well-being, number 3, I think we in the healthcare sector also need to be vigilant of these other, in total 17 different global goals. So in our hospitals, both in Sweden and British Columbia, we are inundated with patients that have burden of lifestyle diseases. And here I have depicted the most common of them. And although they seem to be quite different, they have a couple of interesting things in common. The first one being a chronic low-grade inflammatory response called inflammaging, that is thought to be an accelerator of biological aging. And we also know that these diseases and inflammation associate with the loss of gut biodiversity. In my talk, I will mention sometimes this transcription factor NRF2, and when you are stressed for various reasons, this transcription factor makes sure that there is an upregulation of hundreds of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant genes. And this is the study that convinced me that this is an important transcription factor in nephrology. It's a paper published in JASN 7 years ago, Integrative Biology and Transcription Networks in Chronic Kidney Disease. And this figure here shows that all pathways in this study aggregated into a network of two main clusters compromising inflammation and metabolism-related pathways. And NRF2 served as a hub between these two clusters, suggesting that this is an important player. And this transcription factor is constitutively expressed in all tissues, but the levels may vary among organs. Nevertheless, irrespective of which of these burden of lifestyle diseases associated with the disease of aging you studied, you will find that there is a downregulation of NRF2 activity. And this may be the reason why there is such a strong link between inflammaging and these diseases, because this Nature paper show that NRF2 opposes transcriptional upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokine genes. And now something completely different. And this is a figure I got from National Geographic, depicting the 5 major mass extinctions that have occurred on our planet. Of these mass extinctions, number 3, the Permian-Triassic extinction, is of utmost importance. Because, like we are witnessing today, carbon dioxide emissions caused this, the so far largest mass extinction that we have observed on our planet. Similarly to what we observe today, the temperatures rose, and it has been estimated that it rose from 25 to 40 degrees Celsius. And of course, this mass extinction profoundly altered the course of evolution of life on Earth. We humans have been residing on this planet for a short time period, only 70 to 80,000 years. But especially during the last 100 years, the impact of the human race have been devastating, and we are now witnessing the beginning of the 6th major mass extinction. A mass extinction is defined when there is more than 75% loss of animal species, and the World Wildlife Foundation reported last year that since 40 years back, we are now seeing a 68% loss of animal biodiversity. So Homo sapiens, or if you should translate Homo sapiens, it actually means the wise man, is responsible for this ongoing 6th major mass extinction. We know that global warming, pollution, lack of clean water, deforestation, habitat loss, illegal animal trade are part of this mass extinction. World Health Organization in this report stated that 23% of all global deaths are linked to the environment. So this is a major part of the global death toll. And here I have, in an oversimplified figure, tried to depict what is happening. And the central piece here is in this diseasome of aging that plays such an important role in all these burden of lifestyle diseases that we witness, some of them in epidemic forms now, is this increase in allostatic load due to the exposome. We have a number of established risk factors. We all know about sedentary lifestyle, drug smoking, poor nutrition, and infections, all stimulating this diseasome of aging, which consists of NRF2 depletion, mitochondrial dysfunction, oxidative stress, and a loss of gut biodiversity. So if you want to enable better aging in these diseases, I would guess that you should manipulate this exposome in some way. But we are now witnessing some problems because to these established risk factors, we also now have environmental risk factors that add at an unprecedented rate, including global warming, greenhouse gas emission, pollution. And evidence suggests that these also stimulate this disease of aging. It's been shown that heat stress induces inflammation, oxidative stress, and premature senescence. And the evolution of adaptive systems to cope with this rapidly changing anthropogenic environment is slow. So we are kind of unprepared as a species of what happens now in the environment. And I was shocked to see last month this paper that was published in an ecology journal, showing that as a response to climate warming, we are now witnessing changing animal morphologies due to evolution. And I think this is one of the strongest arguments showing that the climate warming is a real phenomenon. And this is something that you in British Columbia witnessed this summer. This is the forecast I found in some paper with these exceedingly high temperatures in British Columbia for a long period this summer. In Lancet, you could recently read about the hot weather and the heat extremes. And there are numerous interesting novel reviews on the cardiovascular risks of climate change that, of course, is specifically important in vulnerable populations, such as those with poor socioeconomic status or children or with older age. But we are also seeing the same phenomenon in nephrology, and I'm sure you're all aware of these emergent epidemics of chronic kidney disease due to heat stress in rural agriculture communities, especially in Central America. So global warming, pollution, lack of clean water, deforestation are enormous problems that we need to combat, but we also have the habitat loss, illegal wildlife trade, and the loss of biodiversity. And this paper published in PNAS 2018 was really very saddening to read, because it stated that mammal diversity will take millions of years to recover from the current biodiversity crisis. And we should remember that biodiversity is much more than just the number of species. It is also an amount of unique evolutionary history that is lost for every animal that is extinct. And this loss of biodiversity will affect human health. It will increase the spread of emerging and existing infectious diseases. This pandemic is a perfect example of this. It will reduce the chances to find novel treatment strategies for burden of lifestyle diseases using this biomimetic approach that I will talk about soon. It will reduce the opportunities to identify new drugs from the natural world. About 1/3 of the drugs we are using today for our patients actually has its origin in nature. And loss of biodiversity may also reduce the gut microbial diversity. And I think this is a fascinating hypothesis that was raised in this paper, that the loss of biodiversity due to environmental changes, such as burning of fossil fuels, land use change, will affect the human gut microbiota. And via the epigenetic machinery, this will have effects on human health. So there's an hypothesis that loss of planetary biodiversity associate with the loss of gut biodiversity. And here you see these pictures that you will see that there are kind of parallel phenomena. And we are already witnessing that due to the Amazonian deforestation, there is a loss of soil biodiversity. And this will lead to the plants that we are growing in these parts of the world will be less nutritious. And this could be a big problem if this Amazonian deforestation and deforestation of other large forest areas continue. For the sake of chronic kidney disease, we know that there is a lack of microbial biodiversity. This is yet unpublished data from our group. We are using microbial DNA to analyze the biodiversity of microbes all the way from the mouth back to the very rare parts. And you can see that there is a dramatic loss of biodiversity in the gut when the EGFR decreases from 15 to 60 to below 15 mils per minute. And numerous studies such as this one show that lower gut biodiversity is associated with mortality in dialysis patients. This is a recent study we published in collaboration with Scottish researchers evaluating gut microbiota differences with socioeconomic position. The blue bars represent population in high socioeconomic position areas of Glasgow, and the red bars those with low socioeconomic positions. And you can see that beneficial or salutary bacteria are much more common in areas with high socioeconomic position. And you can read in Times, June 22, after this paper, that unfriendly gut bacteria is linked to early aging. And I will not discuss this in detail, but this is an extremely interesting area, how to link the gut microbiota with risk for burden of lifestyle diseases such as cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis. And in this complicated scenario, we have two very interesting uremic toxins, TMA and phenylacetylglutamine, that seems to promote both atherosclerosis and thromboembolic complications. But now back to the natural world. And this is a very interesting paper studying what happens when a sparrow and their gut microbiota, when they move from rural to urban areas. And you can see on the top right that when they move to urban areas, there is a lower biodiversity in the cities, and this is associated with fewer metabolic functions. And this should then, of course, be possible to be associated with lower survival in these sparrows. And in Europe, we have this paper now that was published in Lancet Planetary Health just a week ago and had attracted a lot of interest, looking at the relation between green space and mortality in European cities. And this table here shows the preventable mortality burden due to increases in normalized difference in the vegetation index. And we have a number of cities such as Athens, Brussels, Budapest, Copenhagen, and Riga showed some of the highest mortality burdens due to lack of green space. And this study concludes that the importance of increasing green space in the European cities to reduce natural cause mortality while contributing to the development of sustainable, livable, and healthy cities. Another link between loss of biodiversity and human health is the decrease in animal pollinators that may affect nutrition. And this is a Lancet paper that have attracted a lot of interest, because pollinators contribute to 35% of global food production, and it's responsible for 40% of the supply of our micronutrients. And these horrifying data show what will happen in the decreasing food and nutritional intake if there would be a full pollinator removal. So the declines in animal pollinators could cause significant global health burdens from both non-communicable diseases and micronutrient deficiencies. So we have a situation here in the modern society where we eat unhealthy processed foods. We are using a lot of drugs. There's a climate change, pollution, decline of biodiversity, sedentary lifestyle, socioeconomic positions. And these will all stimulate this disease of aging. So we need to find solutions. Rudolf Virchow once stated that between animal and human medicines there are no dividing lines, nor should there be. The object is different, but the experience obtained constitutes the basis of all medicine. And here I think we have a really interesting opportunity, because one of the most striking aspects of life on our planets is the enormous diversity of species. And this could provide a source for solutions that have been developed through evolution by natural selection in animals living in extreme environments. And this is from a recent review we published, where we try to link all these age-related diseases to ingenious solutions that have been developed in nature in some animals, and these animals have some mechanism that protect them from these age-related diseases. And this is nothing new. Albert Einstein once stated that you should look deep into nature and you will understand everything better. But we have some amazing examples. For example, the extremely interesting cancer resistance that you will find in elephants that very rarely get cancer disease despite their huge body mass. I myself work with bears, which is of major interest for nephrologists and also endocrinologists and cardiologists, because they don't get burden of lifestyle diseases despite a high risk factor profile. This recent paper on giraffes is just amazing. The giraffes, they have high blood pressure, about 240 to 130 millimeter mercury, but they never developed complications like stroke and kidney disease. And here this paper show that there is specific mutation in the giraffes that protect them, and they show that transgenic mice with this mutation from the giraffe actually is protective also in mice, and this could then suggest high blood pressure treatments. The Burmese python, they are snakes that eat seldom, but when they eat, there's massive meals. They can eat a pig or a goat. And just a couple of days after these massive meals, you will find a significant growth in organs, especially the heart. There is an increase of about 40% in the heart size, and this paper show that there is specific composition of fatty acids that promote the beneficial cardiac growth. And of course, this could lead to novel treatment strategies for heart failure. We have the wild tree shrews that lives in Malaysia, which are constantly eating fermented floral nectar with a high alcohol content. So these wild tree shrews, they are constantly intoxicated with alcohol, but never seems to develop any problems with addictions. I have been specifically interested of this transcription factor NRF2, and it seems that in different mammals this is a survival mechanism, irrespective if you look, for example, of this European eel. We have an Antarctic silverfish subjected to oxidative stress, where NRF2 is of importance. We'll have hibernating species such as bats and bears that have an upregulation of NRF2 during the hibernation period. And we have the seals, which are amazing creatures. They can dive down to about 2,000 meters depth for up to 2 hours periods. And there is, during this period, no circulation in the splanchnic organs, such as the kidneys, but they never developed acute kidney injury. And there are discussions whether activation of NRF2 due to fasting is something that protects their kidney function. So if we want to understand all these burden of lifestyle diseases with downregulated NRF2, we need to know our history. And the most dramatic event in this planet history, I think, will be the Great Oxygenation event, which actually set the stage for the transition to aerobe-dominated biota. And this was all these photosynthetic cyanobacteria in the oceans that started to release oxygen. And when there is oxygen, there is oxidative stress, which could have beneficial effects for immune defense and cellular structure synthesis. But we all know that oxidative stress also promotes cell damage, increased risk for mutations. So the evolutionary origin of NRF2 seems to be allied to the timing of the global transition from anaerobic to aerobic conditions. And then we have all these animal species in which we see a survival advantage with upregulated NRF2. We have some human models that could be of much interest. For example, Hutchinson-Gilford progeria syndrome. Children that in the age of 18, 19, 20 years die of massive cardiovascular disease, and they have a markedly downregulated NRF2. So nature actually counteracts all exaggregations from within. In the animal kingdom, NRF2 seems to be playing an important role in the resistance against environmental stress, irrespective if it's global warming, pollution, lack of clean water, toxins. This transcription factor play an important role. But it would, of course, be naive to think that this is the only protective factor. There should be many other ingenious systems that have been developed in nature. So we live on a very hungry planet, and I find these pictures extremely interesting, showing what one family eat during 1 week in different parts of the world. And I think the most interesting part here is the extreme differences in the nutritional habits on our planet. And we know from this Lancet study that the nutrition is extremely important for death and for our health. 22% of all global deaths were attributed to nutritional deficiencies. And no surprise, this consists of high sodium intake and low intake of fruits and vegetables and seeds and whole grains. But actually, suboptimal diet was responsible for more deaths than any other risk globally, and that include tobacco smoking. So there is an urgent need for improving human diet. And here we come directly into the microbiota. And we know that there are intimate connections between microbiota and organ functions for immune functions, metabolism, and the nervous systems. But what we are now facing for the first time in the history of Homo sapiens is an industrialized microbiota. And this industrialized microbiota have several causes, of course, food being one very important one, but there's also studies showing that air pollution and global warming actually will affect the microbial diversity. And our microbiota has evolved from this hunting and gathering period to the ancient agriculture period to this industrialized modern Western diet period in which we have the loss of biodiversity and function in our microbiota. And it seems like we have lost something from ancient foods. And this paper show that some microbes lost from the modern Western diet that you will find in Asian food actually are potent NRF2 activators via stimulation of the alkyl catechol. And then in the previous times in history, fermentation was a very important part of the human ability to preserve food for longer periods. And we know that with fermentation, you invite the microbes you want and you don't let in the microbes you don't want. And here we have a Cell paper from August this year, which I think is just amazing paper. It's a prospective randomized multi-omic study in humans, and it investigates the longitudinal effects of high fiber diet and fermented rich food. And it showed that especially fermented food diet increased microbiome diversity, and it also decreased this inflammaging pattern. And this could be actually a way for us in the Western society to reintroduce evolutionary important foodborne microbes that we have actually lost during the last 100 years due to sanitizing the industrialized environment. And there is just an avalanche of studies showing that processed food, the key hallmark of Western diet, is not good for the gut microbiota or the intestinal barrier permeability, as shown in this paper. Ultra-processed diets cause excessive calorie intake and weight gain. And this is a study in Nature showing that artificial sweeteners alter the gut microbiota and thereby induce glucose intolerance. There's been a lot of discussions of meat intake. And here is a study also published a couple of weeks ago in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, showing at the bottom that if you take meat in general, there is a tendency for increased risk for dementia, which was studied in this cohort study of almost 500,000 participants from a UK biobank. But the interesting findings were when they divided meat into processed meat. At the top, you see it's a markedly increased risk for dementia, whereas unprocessed red meat actually seems to have protective effects. And this links with the massive amount of processed food that we are ingesting. This is from a Swedish supermarket. I'm sure you have the same food in Canada. And we know that all these E numbers the processed food have, are rich in phosphate. We know that phosphate additives is a health risk. There are some E numbers that may be more hazardous than the others. E339 and E451 are such E numbers. And phosphate is an interesting accelerator of biological aging. This is data originated first from Makoto Kurou in Japan, showing this strong inverse correlation between phosphate levels and the longevity in the animal kingdom. So the higher the phosphate levels, the shorter the lifespan. And we also know from numerous studies, such as this Einhain study, that the phosphate intake is directly related to increased risk for death. And here the threshold seems to be phosphate intake about 1.4 gram per day. And there are also numerous studies in the literature showing that phosphate is something that accelerates mammalian aging processes. This is a picture from a food desert, and you may wonder what that is. That is a common finding in many parts of our world, stores which seems to be very rich in food, but it's mostly processed food and very little fresh vegetables and fruits. And this leads me to Glasgow again, because this is a really interesting city, because nowhere else on our planet is there such a scandalous gap in the male life expectancy as in two suburbs in Glasgow. In Lenzie, the average man will become 82 years old, and only 14 kilometers from Lenzie, you will find the suburb of Carlton, where the average man will become 54 years old. So there's a difference in life expectancy of 28 years, only 14 kilometers apart. And of course, this is a heaven for epidemiological research. We have the fortune to be involved in some of this, showing that these males in Carlton, they have an imbalanced diet, they lack fruit and vegetables, they eat a lot of processed red meat, they have more renal dysfunction, they have higher phosphate levels, higher risk of cancer, more inflammation, and of course, gut dysbiosis. So after one of these studies, you could read in the Scottish press that cheap red meat helps to kill off Glasgow's poorest men 30 years early. And this leads us to TMAO, this uremic toxin that has been speculated to be the new red meat risk factor. And we all know that this TMAO is atherogenic, pro-thrombotic, and pro-inflammatory. Red meat is very rich in L-carnitine, which is the TMAO is produced from. And also the red meat will affect the gut microbiome to produce more of the precursor of TMAO. And on top of this, red meat also reduces the ability of kidneys to excrete TMAO. So clearly, meat is not good for our health. This is again from National Geographic. It's not showing the total meat intake, but it's actually showing the changes in meat consumption during 50 years from 1961 to 2011. And here it's obvious that especially China, where the meat consumption has increased 13 to 15 times during this period. And that will create a major problem, not only for the Chinese health, but also for environmental sustainability. So evolution can teach us a lot. And actually, we humans, we have a gastrointestinal tract that is similar to the big apes, the monkeys, but many of us, and I guess especially males, think that we are lions and that we can eat red meat on a daily basis. So finally, I would like to show this paper from Lancet, which in my opinion is one of the most important papers recently published. It's the Eat Lancet Commission, showing that food production is responsible for more than 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions and 70% of all the fresh water use. And this Lancet Commission show that food is actually the single strongest level to optimize human health and environmental sustainability. And we now need a radical transformation of the global food system. This PNAS paper evaluated the effects of foods not only on health, such as cancer and coronary heart disease and diabetes, but also the effects of the same foods on the environment. And here's what they found. We have a number of foods that depicted in green here, where we have which are beneficial both for health and for the environment, whereas we have then the unprocessed red meat and the processed red meat, foods that is neither good for the environment or our health. So dietary transitions toward greater consumption of healthier foods should also improve environmental sustainability. And we are now in a lose-lose quadrant because the food we eat today is neither good for the environment or our health. And there is a massive imbalance in how we eat on our planet because we eat way too much red meat and starchy vegetables, and we eat too little plant food. So we now need to move from this lose-lose quadrant to a win-win quadrant in which the food we eat is good both for our health and the environment. And this creates an interesting possibility using food as medicine. And this is from the cover of Nature Reviews Nephrology, in which we discuss this opportunity. And this is not something new, because we are all known since many hundred years that food can be used to treat certain diseases. This was first shown for citrus fruits that could prevent scurvy. And then we have found also that a lot of vitamins can have effects on our health. And food for medicine should be equivalent food for resilience. And if we could then target a foodome, which is a discipline that studies the food and nutrition domains through the application of advanced omic technologies, we could study systematically this complex foodome that include more than 25,000 different substances that make up our human diet. So the idea here will be to link individual eating patterns to our genome and to our individual diseases. And as we discuss in this review, food as medicine have staggering opportunities, and it is possible to stimulate and affect several parts such as senescent cells, dysbiosis, nitric oxide, mitochondrial biogenesis. And I just like to show you one example of the power of food as medicine. And this is a study on sulforaphane that you will find in broccoli sprouts. And this is a potent stimulator of this transcription factor NRF2. It was shown in this paper that treatment with broccoli sprouts had impressive effects on glycemic control. And they could show that it affected hepatic glucose production in the same magnitude as metformin. So this is a powerful nutrient. And this is another study showing here the impact of dietary supplementation with sulforaphane on skin aging in the old animals. You can see the difference here. So the aim of food as medicine is the generalized application of personalized nutrition. It should be based on solid scientific support to identify the bioactive nutrients that we can use. We need the help of nutritionists that could create tasty food from these bioactive nutrients. We should exclude all environmentally unsustainable ingredients, and we will need help from food influencers and chefs to create cookbooks and menus. And hopefully, in the future, it will be possible to have commercially available grocery bags with tailor-made nutritional ingredients. And this is our vision for the future, that you could develop sustainable grocery bags based on the patient's individual foodom, with nutrients that complement and optimize the effects of drug treatment. Because I think one of the major problems today with our healthcare is that the drugs that we give to our patients, many of them have detrimental effects on the gut microbiome, such as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Proton pump inhibitors are also affecting the microbiome. And of course, we all know that antibiotics also have effects on the gut microbiome, but there are many non-antibiotic drugs that affect the microbiome. This Nature paper showed that we reduce food waste and more plant-based human diets. Actually, more than 2/3 of the future biodiversity losses can be avoided. But meeting the Paris Agreement 1.5 degrees Celsius target requires rapid and ambitious changes to the food systems. And in my opinion, there will be no protection from future pandemics unless we fix the planet's food system. So if we want to survive on this planet, we must gather knowledge from multiple perspectives, and we now need to all engage in planetary health. This is nothing that can be solved by one discipline. We need now to meet at the intersection many different disciplines to interact and try to find solutions for this, the biggest problems that our planet ever encountered. And finally, my final figure will be from a British Medical Journal editorial from just 2 days ago, showing that the planetary health curriculum now must be introduced in medicine. It was needed yesterday, and it should be made a reality today. And with this, I'd like to thank you for your attention out there in British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's a stimulating way for us to start a Friday and for you to end your Friday. I think that you've given us so much to think about and so many interesting pieces of information. I'd like to see if there are any questions or comments that my colleagues around the province have. At the peak, we had 48 people. We have 46 there still. Just wondering if anyone wants to put a question in the Q&A or the chat, or just raise your hand. But maybe while I'm waiting for that, can you maybe expand a little bit on the role of NRF2 in kidney diseases? Because I know you've done a lot of work on that and sort of increasing our understanding and awareness of NRF2 might be valuable for this audience.
Yes, so NRF2 expression is usually downregulated in kidney disease. We have studied that in vessels, we studied in muscles, and we find it to be downregulated. And I think everyone should be aware of the BEAM and BEACON trials with the synthetic NRF2 stimulator bardoxolone. And whenever you target a transcription factor, you must be really know what you are doing, because it could create problems and side effects with the potent synthetic NRF2 stimulators. And this is what happened in the BEACON study, where you had an increased risk for cardiovascular heart failure. And if these patients with signs of heart failure, volume overload, are excluded from treatment with NRF2 stimulators, it seems like it could be an avenue for targeting increased inflammation and oxidative stress in this patient group. So I think there will be a lot of interesting information coming out the next couple of years on the avenue of stimulating NRF2.
Great, thank you. There's a question, and then I know Carolyn put up her hand. So there's a question: with the number of people on the planet, has there been an analysis on the impact of a massive shift to plant-based eating in terms of the environment, or any modeling that looks at if everyone went to plant-based food, environment and effect on other animal populations, etc.?
I don't know the impact of massive. You mean if there's been a change in diet, if it affects?
Yeah, so if everyone's going to plant-based, like certainly in this province and in this country, there's a lot of excitement about everywhere you go, you can get plant-based food, and every food is a vegan. Not every restaurant is starting to have vegan options. So I think the question that Sunit's asking is, if you model this and lots of people go to plant-based food, is there a downstream effect on the environment and other animal populations if we stopped eating meat and fish, for example?
I think regarding the environment, I'm not aware of any such studies, but there are several studies showing that if you reduce meat intake and go into more plant-based protein intake, there is a significant effect on the health status for cancer and cardiovascular disease. This has been demonstrated in many studies. I'm right now thinking mostly of a Japanese study that I know convincingly show this. But regarding effects on the environment, I am not aware of any such studies. And if there has been a change from more meat-based Western diet to plant-based diet in a big region of the world, and if you've seen any impact, I'm not aware of it.
Great. So there's a couple of questions, and I know Carolyn has her hand up. So one of them is, the role of advanced glycosylation end products in kidney disease and the story of how that fits in, because that's sort of 15 years ago or so, we talked a lot about AGEs, right?
Yeah.
And how
AGEs is of course of importance here, and we know that in many of these burden lifestyle diseases there is an accumulation of AGEs that have a relation to vascular health, for example, and patients with chronic kidney disease is just one example where you have an accumulation of AGEs, and it is strongly related to health status.
Great, thanks. Carolyn, can we unmute you? Go ahead.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good morning. Thank you so much. I've learned so much here. I've got a huge interest in planetary health and in making that sort of a special interest within nephrology. So this was such a whirlwind learning. Thank you for all the basic science tie-ins. My area of interest has been in trying to minimize the impact of healthcare, and in particular at provision of kidney care services, and how we might be more aligned with planetary health principles. And in considering this heavily for the past 15 months, the notion of improved prevention is sort of very forefront in my mind about how to get here. So I was really intrigued with your idea of the sustainable grocery bags. I'm trying to think of tangible ways that we can change people's habits, because I think that's what it all comes down to. It's such a tragedy. I think the average person isn't aware of this impact that we have and how to make it easy for people. I'm the last to be on social media, but I wonder as well about influencers and getting big public awareness campaigns out there. And I wondered if you might have any experiences with any data on that idea of sustainable grocery bags, or data on other things that might work for implementing lifestyle changes effectively.
Yeah, it's great comments and questions. And this is a huge area. If you start targeting the foodome and trying to find tailor-made nutrients, we have a long way to go. A lot of basic research needs to be done. We have some information still, but we are lacking a lot of information, and we also lack information how these foods, how it integrate with the drugs that patients are taking. And as I stated, we are really worried now that many of the drugs that we give our patients may have some benefits, but they're also likely having a detrimental impact on the microbiome. And I think the data on proton pump inhibitors are just really scaring how it affects the microbiome. And we ourselves have seen that sevelamer, the phosphate binder, also may have impact on the gut microbiota, and it increases the generation of uremic toxins. So yeah, Dara?
No, keep going, sorry.
So this tailor-made grocery bags is a long way to go to reach there, but I think it will be really interesting if we could start. And we are now at Karolinska undertaking some initial studies. So we have these grocery bags that we send to our patients that are included in this study. They are designed by our nutritionists to be especially healthy for their vascular and general health. And of course, then we are concerned about potassium. So the AstraZeneca that manufacture Lokelma, and this novel potassium binder, is sponsoring this study because they want to show that patients can eat healthy food based on plants, fruits and vegetables, a lot of nuts, without having a risk of high potassium levels when they are on Lokelma treatment. And I can say we are in the middle of the study now, but the patients are really very satisfied with the study, and they get 3 weeks of grocery bags for free, and they also get the continuous monitoring and several calls with the dietitians. And all patients that have been completing the study so far, they are determined that they will continue with this diet, although they have to buy the grocery bags themselves. And we are also starting now a randomized trial to evaluate the effects of broccoli sprouts on metabolic control in patients with chronic kidney disease. But these are just very small efforts, and we need so much more until this vision of grocery bags that could be tailor-made for each disease are a reality.
They're so fascinating, and it's great that, I mean, it is incremental work, but it needs to be done. There are many questions. I'm going to try and ask a couple of them together. So L-carnitine, benefits or risks as it relates to people with kidney disease, and also whether or not you have any insights with respect to variability of the microbiome depending on nutritional status, as in protein catabolic people versus so protein, depending on nutritional status, are there differences in the microbiome in kidney disease, and L-carnitine? Those would be two questions.
So the carnitine question first. Carnitine is like having a dual role here, and I don't really know how much the positive and versus the negative effects of carnitine, how they eventually weigh up in the real world. But red meat is of course an important source of carnitine, which is also of importance for energy metabolism in these patients. I did not talk very good about red meat, but we should not forget that red meat is an excellent source of proteins and high quality amino acids, and it's a source of iron. I would think that we need to adapt our diet to the age we are in. When you are growing, when you are pregnant, I'm sure that red meat will be a lot of benefit, but if you are an older mid-aged man like me, there is no need actually to eat a lot of red meat. So maybe we need to give our meat advices according to the age and gender of these patients. But of course, we know very little about the specifics of such recommendations yet. But I think one thing is really clear, and that is that processed red meat is something that you should avoid irrespective of age and gender. And if you want to eat good meat, which you can do sometimes, I would go for locally produced red meat that have not been processed.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, I mean, you raised, there is a push here for deprescribing of certain medications, and I wonder if in the context of deprescribing and what we know about the gut microbiome, that if we can get rid of PPIs and non-steroidals and a few other things, might we actually improve the outcome of patients? So I think you've given us lots of food for thought, no pun intended, but really a fantastic and stimulating discussion, and we hope to potentially participate in some of the studies if you're interested. I think we've got a hugely interested group of multidisciplinary teams, dietitians, pharmacists, nurses, and physicians, and most importantly, patients who are really interested in participating in these kinds of programs, but also interested in coming back as we learn more and more about the interaction of food, the planet, and our disease states or health states as they may be.
Yeah.
So
it would be great to have more interactions with Karolinska Institute, that our team here and you in British Columbia. So if you are interested in such, just let me know, and we have an
I think I'd like to sort of set up some more. We have some researchers and as I said, very interested teams. So there may be a lot of potential. And Carolyn, who's leading our planetary health on the other side of the food part, which is the consumption of stuff we use to dialyze people and how we even reduce those, it would be very complementary. So yeah, Peter, thank you very much. I know this was relatively short notice for you, but you put together, as usual, a very stimulating conversation. There are many more questions, but we're out of time, and I want to respect people's time with that. But perhaps we can invite you back for more of a Q&A so that we can actually get to the root of this more fully. So thank you again very much, and thank you all for participating.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.